Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, a biologist and author best known for his hypothesis of morphic resonance, joins Dr. Matthew Fox, an internationally acclaimed spiritual theologian, author, and activist who has contributed to the rediscovery of Hildegard of Bingen, Meister Eckhart, and Thomas Aquinas as pre-modern mystics and prophets. Together, they present this book titled The Physics of Angels, Exploring the Realm Where Science and Spirit Meet. It is written in conversational style between them both, addressing deep questions on angelology and providing references from authors such as Pseudo Dionysius, the Areopagite, St. Thomas Aquinas, and Hildegard of Bingen, as well as including their modern input based on what science and others have been able to shed light on. Welcome, I am Daisy, your hostess. You are joining me on this 3-part video read series as we explore this mystical topic. Have you ever had an angelic experience? If so, please share your story in the comment. In this video, the authors give a background on angels and talk about the return of the angels, their multiplicity, hierarchies, the different kind of angels, and they reference works from Pseudo Dionysius, who was a 5th through 6th century AD author who wrote highly influential treatises synthesizing Neoplatonic philosophy with Christian theology. His work is often wrongly attributed to Dionysius the Areopagite, who was a 1st century Athenian judge converted to Christianity by St. Paul. Anyways, I will be working to bring some of Pseudo Dionysius' work to my playlist, specifically the Celestial Hierarchy. Like I've mentioned in previous videos, I'm no scholar, just someone who is curious about the world I came to be a part of. If you can spare me a minute, I'd like to share one of those curiosities, and perhaps you might know something I don't and shed some light for me. So I do look forward to your comments. I was looking at the timeline and noticed that Pseudo Dionysius was placed in the 5th through 6th century AD, and he is said to be the first person to introduce the hierarchy of angels. Now, the concept of angels, according to scholars, is said to have originated in ancient Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and particularly Zoroastrian traditions, which brings us to the early Sumerian Akkadian period, which is from circa 3000 BC to 2100 BC. Archaeologists have found evidence of winged deity figures, sometimes identified as Anunnaki or divine messengers, serving higher deities. The Epic of Gilgamesh, which I do have here in my playlist, make sure to check that out, is said to have been composed over a long period, dating around 2100 to 2000 BC. It is often cited as a source for understanding early Mesopotamian concepts of protective spirits, such as the Lamassu or Shedu, which are often depicted as winged anthropomorphic creatures. The Pentateuch, the first 5 books of Moses, is said to have been written and compiled over centuries, culminating around the 6th to 5th century BC. Now, from my understanding, that's much later than the Epic of Gilgamesh, which happened much, much earlier. So, from what I've researched, it does not explicitly, meaning the Pentateuch, does not write about formal hierarchy or ranked choirs of angels. It mentions specific types of heavenly beings, notably cherubim guarding Eden, but does not organize them into ranks, roles, or orders. That was developed later. It is also an important thing to note that the Christian angel hierarchy is not mentioned in the Bible. The classic 9-level hierarchy of angels, which will be discussed by the authors, was primarily developed by Pseudo Dionysius the Areopagite. Jesus did not explicitly outline a formal hierarchy, even though he is said to be the king of the angels, but it is recorded that he mentions the angels, particularly when discussing his return, when he's discussing judgment and protection. So you see, here is the conundrum, because logically, people don't start talking about something unless it has been formulated or it's been put out there. So apparently, during Jesus' time, no hierarchy has been set by any of these ancient, people or text or pictures, whatever they were using to understand their history. And so it is, even Jesus in his own lifetime does not share the hierarchy of angels. But later, obviously after he's passed on, the New Testament in the book of Hebrews declares him as the king of the angels. But I do say mighty is the pen in the hands of the right people, and it was under the grace of Pseudo Dionysius that the rank of angels took wings, so to speak, and by doing so expanding human consciousness into these mystical realms. And without further delay, I now turn the page. The Physics of Angels, Exploring the Realm Where Science and Spirit Meet, by Matthew Fox and Rupert Sheldrake. To the angels, in the hope that they return to guide us in the new millennium. Angel 1. A ministering spirit or divine messenger, one of an order of spiritual beings superior to man in power and intelligence, who are the attendants and messengers of deity. Hence, B. One of the fallen spirits who rebelled against God. C. A guardian or attendant spirit. D. Figurative, a person who resembles an angel in attributes or actions. 2. Any messenger of God, as a prophet or preacher, a pastor or minister of a church. Poetical, a messenger. Figurative, an angel of death. 3. Transferred, a conventional figure with wings. Photon, a corpuscle or unit particle of light. From the Shorter Oxford English Dictionary, Oxford University Press. Photon defined from the Penguin Dictionary of Physics, a quantum of electromagnetic radiation that has zero rest mass and energy equal to the product of the frequency of the radiation and the Planck, Planck constant. In some contexts, it is convenient to regard the photon as an elementary particle. Preface. It may seem unlikely that a scientist and a theologian would sit down at the end of the 20th century to discuss angels. Both disciplines at the end of the modern era appear equally embarrassed by this subject. Nevertheless, although angels have been ignored by the scientific and theological establishments, recent surveys have shown that many people still believe in them. In the United States, for example, over 2/3 believe in their existence, and 1/3 state that they have personally felt an angelic presence in their lives, half believe in the existence of devils. And angels persist. We are entering a new phase of both science and theology, and the subject of angels becomes surprisingly relevant again. Both the new cosmology and the old angelology raise significant questions about the existence and role of consciousness at levels beyond the human. When the two of us held our first discussions on this subject, we were fascinated by the parallels between Thomas Aquinas speaking of angels in the Middle Ages and Albert Einstein speaking of photons in this century. Hence the title of this book, The Physics of Angels. The grassroots revival of interest in angels is timely. Much of the present interest centers on experiences of help and assistance at times of need. It is intensely personal in nature and individualistic in spirit. The traditional Western understanding of angels, however, is much deeper and richer than this modern literature would suggest, and far more concerned with community and our common development and our relationship with one another, God, and the universe. These values fit with a more holistic or organic understanding of nature and of society. Furthermore, it is important to acknowledge common experiences that emerge in all world cultures and religions when we are living in an ever-shrinking global village. All cultures, including our own, acknowledge the existence of spirits at levels beyond the human. We call them angels, but they go under different names in other traditions. This is one of the most fundamental themes in human spiritual and religious experience. It is difficult to imagine deep ecumenism advancing among these cultures and religions without acknowledging angels in our midst and angels in our own traditions. Other experiences that all human beings face together include the ecological crisis, for which we require all the wisdom we can muster. Angels may be able to assist us in this work, and may well prove to be indispensable allies, truly guardian angels, instructing us in safeguarding our inheritance of a once healthy but today endangered planet. For all these reasons, it is important to return to our own spiritual tradition, to examine what it tells us about angels, and to connect that wisdom to today's evolutionary cosmology. This is necessary in order to set the stage for deeper explorations in the future, a future we believe will be characterized by a much more eager effort to examine consciousness on this planet and beyond. To assist us in this task of exploring our own spiritual tradition, we have chosen to concentrate on three giants of the Western tradition whose treatment of angels is particularly broad, deep, and influential. They are Dionysius the Areopagite, a Syrian monk whose classic work, the Celestial Hierarchies, was written in the 6th century; Hildegard of Bingen, a German abbess of the 12th century; and St. Thomas of Aquinas, a philosopher-theologian of the 13th century. Dionysius the Areopagite made an amazing synthesis of the currents of the Neoplatonic philosophies of the Middle East in the light of his own Christian theology and experience. Hildegard of Bingen, though she called on the tradition of angelology handed down through the monastic tradition of the Western Church, nevertheless worked especially out of her visionary experiences with the angelic realms. Thomas Aquinas created a synthesis of the study of angels, including the views of the Muslim philosopher Averroes, the writings of Dionysius the Areopagite, the science and philosophy of Aristotle, and the biblical tradition. He also raised profound speculative questions that are provocative even today, and are especially interesting in the light of the cosmology now emerging from today's science. It is likely that these three thinkers devoted more of their intellectual labor to angelology than any other three major thinkers of the West. We begin with an introductory dialogue in which we explore the history of the understanding of angels in the West and the way in which they were central to the tradition of the early church and medieval theology. We explore how the mechanistic revolution in science in the 17th century left no place for angels in the mechanical cosmos and led to a decline of interest in this subject in science and theology. We also discuss the recent grassroots revival of interest in angels and the importance today of an ecumenical or cross-culture understanding of the spiritual realms. We then turn to our three main authors. We have selected their most important and relevant passages about angels, and each of these passages is followed by a discussion in which we try to work out their meaning today from both a theological and scientific perspective. In these discussions, we are less concerned with the theology and science of yesterday than with the potential theology and science of tomorrow. We have both found this method of dialogue illuminating. It has taken each of us beyond any understanding we would be able to arrive at individually with our own limited perspectives. We hope that what for us was a creative process will help others in their exploration and thinking. We conclude by considering how the exploration of angels in a living cosmos could enliven and enrich both religion and science as we enter a new millennium. We end with a series of questions. The illustrations provided their own kind of text for recalling the role of angels in the Bible and in other traditions. They show how visions of winged spirits are present throughout the world, both in shamanic cultures and in organized religions. They emphasize the deep roots of the Christian belief in angels. They reveal how conventions of portraying winged figures have persisted over millennia, and at the same time exemplify the many different ways in which angels have been interpreted. Angels seem always to have inspired artists. Introduction: The return of the angels and the new cosmology. A conversation between Matthew and Rupert. Matthew: Why are the angels returning today? In recent years, they have been the subject of many magazine articles and TV shows, and there is a flood of books, including several bestsellers, about angels. Is this a fad? Are angels just the latest consumer object for hungry souls? Is this a flight to another world, an escape to an ethereal realm of light, a distraction keeping us from addressing pressing social and political issues? Or might it be that the return of the angels can inspire our moral imagination? Can they give us the courage to deal more effectively and imaginatively with these issues as we move into the third millennium? I have recently been taking a survey asking people if they have ever experienced angels. Between 60 and 80% of the people at my lectures say that they have. Perhaps such people are not typical, but surveys of random samples of the American population show that a third have felt the presence of an angel at some time in their lives. This suggests that angels do not always have to be believed in. When you experience something, you do not have to believe in it any longer. It's not a matter of belief, but a matter of experience. Mysticism is about trusting our experience. And today, perhaps, we are being asked to trust our experience of angels. In the machine of cosmology of the last few centuries, there was no room for angels. There was no room for mystics. As we move beyond this machine cosmology, no doubt the mystics are going to come back, and the angels are returning because a living cosmology is returning. St. Thomas Aquinas, the 13th century theologian, said, "The universe would not be complete without angels. The entire corporeal world is governed by God through the angels." The ancient traditional teaching is that when you live in the universe and not just in a man-made machine, there is room for angels. What is an angel, and what do they do? First, angels are powerful. Do not be deceived by the bare-bottom cherubs with which the Baroque era has filled our imaginations. When an angel appears in the scriptures, the first words invariably are, "Don't be afraid." Now, would those be their first words if they came as bare-bottom cherubs? "Pin my diaper on" would be more likely, but angels are awesome. The poet Rilke says that every angel is terrifying. What are they powerful at? Angels are essentially understanding beings. They think deeply. They are experts at understanding, at standing under. The primal thoughts that uphold all our other thoughts, angels know through intuition, according to Aquinas and other teachers on angels. Angels don't have to go to school to learn the essence of things. They don't need discursive reasoning and experimentation to learn. They get it all intuitively, immediately. They are experts at intuition, and they can assist our intuition. This is one reason that angels and artists befriend one another so profoundly. When we look at the wonderful, amazing images of angels that artists have given us, we are dealing not with just a rich subject of painting, but with a relationship going on between angels and artists. Intuition is the highway in which angels roam. Angels are also special friends to the prophets, and we need prophets today. We need prophets in every profession, in every role of citizenship, in every generation. We need young prophets and old prophets. What do prophets do? Asked Rabbi Heckel. Prophets interfere. If we are going to shift the course of humanity today, we need prophets. And according to Aquinas, angels are very much involved in prophecy. In addition, angels have very strong wills, and Aquinas says their will is by nature loving. Angels are not abstract intellectuals. They are loving, understanding beings. Loving invades their understanding. Their knowledge is a heart knowledge. It is wisdom, not just knowledge. And so we see that in their expert domains of understanding, knowing, loving, compassion, and prophecy, angels clearly have a lot to teach us about spirituality. And their tasks are not trivial. They have serious cosmic duties to perform, relating to the wisdom and the knowledge that they carry. One of these tasks is to praise. Wherever there is praise going on, angels seem to show up. Indeed, I think their absence parallels what I would call a praise crisis in Western civilization. As we learn to praise again, the angels will return. Both Hildegard of Bingen and Thomas Aquinas teach that the devil does not praise, and that's what makes the devil different from the angels, a refusal to praise. How much of our culture in the last few centuries has indeed been a refusal to praise? What is praise, except the noise that joy makes, the noise that awe makes? And if we are bereft of praise, is it because we have been bereft of awe and joy in the machine, cage-like world we have been living in? The new cosmology awakens us again to awe and wonder, and therefore elicits praise. To study angels is to shed light on ourselves, especially those aspects of ourselves that have been put down in our secularized civilization, our secularized educational systems, and even our secularized worship system. By secularization, I mean anything that sucks the awe out of things. The angels are agents and co-workers with us human beings. Sometimes they guard and defend us. Sometimes they inspire us and announce big news to us. They get us to move. Sometimes they heal us. And sometimes they usher us into different realms from which we are to take back mysteries to their particular realm. Aquinas says, we do the works that are of God along with the holy angels, but even more than that, Aquinas warns us that angels always announce the divine silence, the silence that precedes our own inspiration, our own words, the silence that meditation and contemplation bring. Angels make human beings happy. It is very rare to meet someone who has met an angel who doesn't wear a smile on his or her face. To encounter an angel is to return joyful. As Aquinas says, happiness consists in apprehending something better than ourselves. Awe and wonder and the kind of power that angels represent are of such an ilk. They call us to be greater beings ourselves. Finally, the sin of the shadow of angels had to do with arrogance and the misuse of knowledge and power. Doesn't this sound familiar as we reflect on the last 2 centuries of Western civilization? Some amazing knowledge has come forward during this period, and some amazing and healthy empowerment too, but there has also been a dark side. Arrogance has brought about so much of our ecological despair today. The Faust myth is a statement about the misuse of knowledge, power, and arrogance in our effort to know the universe. Do the shadow angels not represent the shadow side of Western civilization, a side that has taken arrogance and the misuse of knowledge and power as a normal way of life? Rupert, I would like to take up your point about the close links of angel to cosmology. The association of angels with the heavens is what came to me first of all. I grew up in Newark-on-Trent, a market town in Nottinghamshire, England, where there is a magnificent medieval parish church. In the roof of the church, as in many late medieval churches, the beams are supported by carved angels. And in the great Gothic cathedral of Lincoln, only 15 miles from Newark, there's a part of the cathedral called the Angel Choir. High up are these angels playing musical instruments, the celestial choirs. To see them, you have to look up. So from childhood, this is my image of the angels. They are associated with the stars. And this is what I'd like to talk about first, the cosmological aspect of the angels, and particularly their association with the heavens. In the Middle Ages, as in all previous ages, it was generally believed that the heavens were alive. The whole cosmos was alive. The heavens were populated with innumerable conscious beings associated with the stars, the planets, and maybe the spaces in between. When people thought of God in heaven, they were not thinking in terms of some vague metaphor or some psychological state. They were thinking of the sky. Our Father who art in heaven. Nowadays, I suppose many Christians assume that this is a merely metaphorical statement, nothing to do with the actual sky. The heavens have been handed over to science. The celestial realm is the domain of astronomy, and astronomy has nothing to do with God or spirits or angels. It is concerned with the galaxies, the geometry of the gravitational field, the emission spectra of hydrogen atoms, the life cycles of stars, quasars, black holes, and so forth. But this isn't how people used to think. They thought that the heavens were full of spirits and of God. And indeed, if you think of God as omnipresent everywhere, divinity must be present throughout the whole universe, of which the earth is but an infinitesimal part. Through the scientific revolution of the 17th century, the universe was mechanized, and at the same time the heavens were secularized. They were made up of ordinary matter gliding around in perfect accordance with Newtonian laws. There was no room in them for angelic intelligences. Angels have no place in mechanistic world, except perhaps as a psychological phenomena existing only within our imaginations. But this mechanistic worldview is now being superseded by science itself. Recent scientific insights are leading us toward a new vision of a living world. This is the main theme of my book, The Rebirth of Nature. The old mechanical universe was a vast machine gradually running out of steam as it headed toward a thermodynamic heat death. But since the 1960s, it has been replaced by an evolutionary cosmos. The universe began very small and hot in the primal fireball, less than the size of a pinhead, and has been expanding ever since. As it grows, it cools down. More and more structures, forms, and patterns develop within it. At first, there were no atoms, no stars, no galaxies, no elements like iron and carbon, no planets, no biological life. As the universe expanded, all these things came into being somewhere for the first time, and were then repeated countlessly in many places and times. This growing, evolving universe is nothing like a machine. It is more like a developing organism. Instead of nature being made up of inert atoms, just inert bits of stuff enduring forever, we now have the idea that atoms are complex structures of activity. Matter is now more like a process than a thing. As the philosopher of science Sir Karl Popper has put it, through modern physics, materialism has transcended itself. Matter is no longer the fundamental explanatory principle, but is itself explained in terms of more fundamental principles, namely fields and energy. Instead of living on an inanimate planet, a misty ball of rock hurtling around the sun in accordance with Newton's law of motion, we can now think of ourselves as living in Mother Earth. The Gaia hypothesis puts into a contemporary scientific form the ancient intuition that we live in a living world. Instead of the universe being rigidly determined, with everything proceeding inexorably in accordance with mechanical causality, we have a world to which freedom, openness, and spontaneity have returned. Indeterminism came in through quantum theory in the 1920s. More recently, chaos theory has confirmed that the old ideal of Newtonian determinism was an illusion. Science has been liberated from the idea that we live in a totally predictable and rigidly determined universe. Instead of nature being uncreative, we now see it as creative. Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace gave a scientific formulation to the idea that plants and animals are brought forth by Mother Nature herself, but for a long time, physicists denied that evolution had any part to play in the cosmos as a whole. They went on believing that it was an uncreative machine until the 1960s, but we have now come to see that creative evolution is not confined to the realm of biological life. The evolutionary development of the entire cosmos is a vast creative process. Instead of the idea that the whole of nature would soon be fully understood in terms of mathematical physics, it turns out that 90 to 99% of the matter in the cosmos is dark matter, utterly unknown to us. It is as if physics has discovered the cosmic unconscious. We don't know what this dark matter is, or what it does, or how it influences the way things happen. Moreover, the evolutionary cosmology throws the old idea of eternal laws of nature into doubt. If nature evolves, why shouldn't the laws of nature evolve as well? How could we possibly know that the laws that govern you and me, the crystallization of sugar, the weather, and so on, were all there at the moment of the Big Bang? In an evolutionary universe, it makes more sense to think of the laws of nature evolving too. I think it makes even better sense to regard the irregularities of nature as more like habits, and the habits of nature evolve. Instead of the whole universe being governed by an eternal mathematical mind, it may depend on an inherent memory. This is the basis of my hypothesis of morphic resonance, memory, and nature. Finally, instead of everything being explained in terms of smaller bits and ultimate particles, we can now think of the universe holistically, organized in a series of levels of organization in a nested hierarchy of holarchy. At each level, things are both wholes and parts. Atoms are wholes consisting of subatomic parts, themselves wholes at a lower level. Molecules are wholes made up of atomic parts. Crystals are wholes made up of molecular parts. Likewise, cells within tissues, tissues within organs, organs within organisms within societies, societies within ecosystems, ecosystems within Gaia, Gaia in the solar system in the galaxy, and so on. Everywhere, levels within levels of organization, each system at the same time both a whole made up of parts and a part within a larger whole. At each level, the whole is more than the sum of the parts. I suggest that this wholeness depends on what I call a morphic field, an organizing field that underlies the system's structure. Morphic fields are structured by morphic resonance. They have memory within them. Indeed, they are bearers of the memory inherent in nature. At each level of organization, morphic fields animate the organisms, giving them their habits and their capacity to organize themselves. In this sense, molecules, stars, and galaxies are alive, not just microbes, plants, and animals. And if they are alive, are they conscious? Do they have minds or intelligences associated with them? Consider levels of organization such as Gaia, or the solar system, or the galaxy. If the fields that organize them are associated with spirit, intelligence, or consciousness, then we are talking about superhuman consciousness. If a galaxy has consciousness, spirit, or mind, that mind is going to be inconceivably larger in scope than that of any professor at Harvard or intellectual in Paris. Matthew. Yes, during the Newtonian Cartesian industrial age, angels were banished. There's no room for angels in a machine. There wasn't even room for souls in a machine. And not only were angels banished, they were trivialized. Think of Baroque churches built in the 17th century, the same century that science and religion split. Religion took the soul, which became more and more introverted and puny, and scientists took the universe. In Baroque architecture, angels became chubby, cute little babies that you want to pinch. What we need today is angel liberation. For theologians, it became an embarrassment for 300 years even to mention angels. But angels are mentioned throughout the Bible. In fact, there are legions of angels. Whenever you talk about cosmology, the angels come out. In the first century, when the Christian scriptures were written, the number one question going around the Mediterranean basin was, are the angels our friends or our foes? Everyone believed in angels in Greece and Rome. They were part of the accepted cosmology. But the question was, can we trust these invisible forces of the universe that are moving planets and the elements? How trustworthy is the universe? That's so interesting because in the 20th century, Einstein was once asked, what's the most important question you can ask in life? And his answer was, is the universe a friendly place or not? It's the same question. I tell my students that every time you see angels mentioned in the Bible, you should think Einstein, because you're dealing with the same issue. It's the ultimate cosmological issue. Can we trust the cosmos? Is the cosmos benign? In the numerous hymns of the cosmic Christ in the Bible, there are allusions to the angels. For example, in the book of Romans, chapter 8, verses 38 through 39, Ephesians, chapter 1, verse 20 through 21, Colossians, chapter 1, verse 15 through 16, Hebrews, chapter 1, verse 3 through 4. The early Christians were responding to this buzz question in the first century. Christ has power over the angels and archangels, the powers and principalities. What are they saying? They're saying, no matter what these invisible forces are doing with the elements of the universe, the smile of God, as represented by the Christ, means you can relax, be cool. The universe is a friendly place. There is a benign power over the angels. It is the Christ, the cosmic Christ, Tradition is set up in the context of angelology because it's set up in terms of cosmology. Rupert, even though the heavens have been secularized and mechanized, these questions have not gone away. A spiritual void was created when the religious imagination withdrew from the heavens, and because the scientific imagination is so impoverished, science fiction has risen up to fill the gap. The heavens have been peopled by the fantasies of science fiction writers. Some of these writers are talented and use the heavens as a projection screen for stories of interest and value. Most are banal. They're not up to the job of giving us a real sense of the awe and the wonder of the universe. Spaceships shifting into time warps, the evil empire, Star Wars, space cops, and aliens, these are hardly adequate representations of the cosmic intelligences. Yet science fiction is the main influence on the way most children first think of the heavens. The cosmological void caused by the expulsion and trivialization of the angels has simply been left to science fiction writers and UFO enthusiasts. What an incredible loss this is. The conventions of science fiction were established in the context of the mechanical universe before the cosmological revolution of the 1960s and take little account of what has been discovered since. We now have a vastly expanded view of the heavens with countless galaxies, quasars, pulsars, black holes, and 15 billion years of cosmic history. I think one of the things we need to do is recover a sense of the life of the heavens so that when we actually look at the stars, when we actually look at the sky, we become aware of this divine presence in the sky and of the intelligence and the life within it. Matthew, yes, today we are recovering the sense of the living earth, Gaia, and in many native traditions, Mother Earth, but it is equally important to recover the sense of the life of the sky and to bring the two together. Josie Habde, a Seneca woman who teaches with us, says that when native people dance, their knees bend to go into earth, but their shoulders roll to pick up Father Sky energy, and it is the two energies together that give the whole complement of energy. We have not only secularized the sky, we have shot our rockets out there and left our debris out there. We are now out there. But the universe is so much vaster and more amazing and constantly expanding than we had ever imagined. And we are not just talking space, we're talking time. We are picking up light from billions of years ago. When we relate to the sky as well as to the earth, we're talking about the sacralization of time as well as space. Rupert, in the past, people had a sense that what happened on earth was related to what happened in the heavens. This is the tradition that is preserved in a living form today by astrology. But unfortunately, in the 17th century, astrology split off from astronomy. Astrology gave a meaning to the movements of the heavens and their relation to earth. The planets still bear the names of gods and goddesses like Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter, who in the Christian world were regarded as angels. These planetary gods, spirits, or angels with their different dispositions and relationships affected life on earth. In India, it's still generally believed that this relationship between the heavens and the earth is of vast importance. When people arrange marriages, and many marriages are still arranged, an astrologer consults the charts of the prospective bride and bridegroom to make sure they're compatible. If they are, the astrologer will then select the time that they should be married. When I first started living in India, I was surprised to receive wedding invitations from Indian friends and colleagues stating, for example, that the marriage of Radha and Krishnan will be celebrated at 3:34 a.m. or some such outlandish time. And although Indians are late for almost everything, they got it right for such an important event. The tying of the knot linking the two together in marriage would happen at the exact moment when their union was in harmony with the heavens. Elective astrology, choosing the right dates and times for important events, was still practiced in England up until the 18th century, and it was even practiced in the White House by President and Mrs. Reagan. The relation of the heavens and the earth was very important in the old cosmology, but because astrology and astronomy have split apart, astronomers see no meaning in what's happening in the stars. They see no life, intelligence, or consciousness in the heavens. Astrologers see meaning, pattern, and a relationship between what happens in the heavens and what happens on earth. But unfortunately, most never look at the sky. I know very few astrologers who can actually identify the stars and planets. Astrology is done from books, or nowadays from computer programs. I hope someone will soon start giving courses on astronomy for astrologers. I think it is important to bring these two traditions together again. In many tradition cultures, myths tell of the way that the people are either inspired by or actually come from particular stars. For example, the Dogon in West Africa have a strong relationship with Sirius, the dog star. And to my mind, it's perfectly possible that by looking at stars and connecting with the intelligence that's there, by forming a direct link to stars and their spirits, some influence or inspiration could pass from the star to the person consciously opening to it. This has certainly been the belief of people through the ages. The implications of this tradition are staggering. When we look at the stars, we can consider the possibility not only that some may have planets around them with living beings on them, which I think very probable, but also that the very stars themselves may have a kind of life, intelligence, or spirit. The stars are organized in larger units, galaxies, each of which contains billions of stars and has a galactic nucleus at its center with unknown properties. There are billions of galaxies in the heavens, and there may be a governing intelligence for each galaxy, and galaxies usually come in clusters, which may in turn have an organizing spirit. And thus there may be hierarchies of organizing intelligences, galactic clusters including galaxies, galaxies including solar systems, and solar systems include planets. And at each level there's a wholeness, which is included within a higher level of wholeness. So we have many levels of organization, all which can be thought of as associated with some kind of intelligence or mind. In the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, SETI, which some scientists like discussing, they usually concentrate on the possibility that intelligent beings on other planets will transmit signals by radio that are mathematically meaningful, such as the sequence of prime numbers, and from these signals we will be able to infer the existence of intelligent beings wishing to communicate with us. But it may be that communication with other forms of intelligence could be far more direct. It may not rely on radio transmissions. It may not need spaceships. It may not depend on UFOs. Direct mental contact with the celestial intelligence may be possible through a kind of telepathy. Matthew. For me, there's no doubt that previous civilizations that we call indigenous knew much more than we do about communicating over large distances without technology. It's there too in the lore of some of our Western saints who were psychics. Rupert. And technology may in any case be of very limited use in communicating with intelligences in other parts of the universe. The SETI program, intermittently funded by the US government, shows up these limitations quite clearly. The standard assumption is that the inhabitant of a solitary planet would broadcast radio signals of a mathematically meaningful kind in the hope of finding another intelligent species somewhere in space. This is what astronomer Timothy Ferris calls the lonely heart scenario. Lonesome, technically proficient species seeks same, object communication. Even if we were to receive and recognize such messages from a planet around a nearby star, communication would be very slow. The nearest star is about 4.2 light years away, so even if we reply immediately, it will take 8.4 years between their sending a message and receiving our reply. Our galaxy is 100,000 light years across. So if you could take 100,000 years for radio messages to pass from one side of the galaxy to another, and 200,000 years before replies could be received, what civilization would have a lifespan and record-keeping system adequate to communicate over periods such as that? And as for communication with inhabitants of planets in other galaxies, forget it. The nearest regular galaxy to our own, the Andromeda Galaxy, is 1.8 million light years away. So replies will take 3.6 million years to arrive. For galaxies a billion light years away, replies will take 2 billion years. If the transfer of thoughts can happen faster than the speed of light, then the whole question of interstellar and intergalactic communication looks very different, as it does when we broaden our thinking about intelligences elsewhere in the cosmos. Instead of confining our attention to minds of biological organisms such as ourselves living in technological civilizations, we can explore the possibility that planets, stars, galaxies, and galactic clusters also have a kind of consciousness. This is where the traditional understanding and experience of cosmic intelligences may be able to help us, and especially the angelology of Dionysus the Areopagite, Hildegard of Bingen, and Thomas Aquinas. Consider, for example, the possibility that the sun is conscious. This is not a very far-fetched idea, even in terms of the standard materialistic assumptions of orthodox science. Materialists believe that our own mental activity is associated with complex electromagnetic patterns in our brains. These patterns of electromagnetic activity are generally assumed to be the interface between consciousness and the physical activity of our brains. Consciousness is somehow supposed to emerge from these patterns, but the complex electromagnetic patterns in our brains are as nothing compared with the complexity of electromagnetic patterns in the sun. The sun is a fireball of plasma fueled by nuclear fusion reactions. A plasma is an ionized gas, and it is highly sensitive to electrical and magnetic influences. The sun is the theater of extreme complex rhythmic patterns of electromagnetic activity with an underlying cycle about 22 years long. About every 11 years, the magnetic polarity of the sun reverses. Its north magnetic pole switches to the south, or vice versa. After another 11 years, the poles return to their previous positions. This reversal of polarity is connected with complex harmonic cycles of vibration, swirling resonant patterns of electromagnetic activity. If people are prepared to admit that our consciousness is associated with these complex electromagnetic patterns, then why shouldn't the sun have a consciousness? The sun may think. Its mental activity may be associated with complex and measurable electromagnetic events both on its surface and deeper within. If there is a connection between our consciousness and complex dynamic electromagnetic patterns in our brains, there's no reason that I can see for denying the possibility of this connection in other cases, and especially on the sun. If the sun is conscious, why not the other stars too? All the stars may have mental activity, life, and intelligence associated with them. And this is, of course, precisely what was believed in the past, that the stars are the seat of intelligences, and these intelligences are angels. Matthew, I'm surprised to hear you say this. You are really sticking your neck out. I've never heard you speak of the sun and stars like this before, but ideas like these would have many implications for worship. We need to set our prayer circles in the context of this vast, alive, complex, and amazing universe. For example, today we have the electronics to do this, to take worship out of the hands of little books and put it into a cosmology again. Then the angels will be present at the worship once again. The angel that has something to do with the incredible intelligence of the sun ought to be there. In our worship, we ought to be awakening the sense of awe, and awe includes terror with reality. The universe is our home, and anything we're talking about is our home. This is the temple of God. It's God's home. Angels are so often depicted as light beings, reflecting the luminosity of the Divine One. I know you were struck in reading Thomas Aquinas' statement that angels move from one place to another with no time lapse. You said it reminded you of Einstein's thinking about light. What about the idea of angels as photons, light bearers? Rupert, When Aquinas discusses how angels move from place to place, his reasoning has extraordinary parallels to both quantum and relativity theories. Angels are quantized. You get a whole angel or none at all. They move as units of action. The only way you can detect their presence is through action. They are quanta of action. And although when they act in one place and then in another, from one point of view, time elapses while they're moving, from the point of view of the angel, this movement is instantaneous. No time elapses. This is just like Einstein's description of the movement of a photon of light. Although we as external observers can measure the speed of light, from the point of view of the light itself, no time elapses as it is traveling. It doesn't get older. We still have light around from 15 billion years ago, from the Big Bang, in the form of the cosmic microwave background radiation. After all that time, it's still around and still going strong. So in modern physics, there are remarkable parallels to the traditional doctrines about angels, and I think the parallels arise because the same problems are being considered. How does something without mass, without body, but capable of action move? Angels, according to Aquinas, have no mass, they have no body, and the same goes for photons. They are massless, and you can detect them only by their action. Matthew, does that mean that photons are immortal? Rupert, yes, as long as they're moving at the speed of light from place to place, but when they act, they are extinguished through their action. So in that sense, they come to an end. They pass on their energy as they act. This, I presume, makes them different from angels. Although there are parallels between modern physics and medieval ideas about angels, the aspect of modern science that raises the most interesting questions is the theory of evolution. In the Middle Ages, nature was regarded as fixed. The cosmos, the earth, and the forms of life upon it were not seen as evolving. In biology, the idea of evolution was first proposed in a scientific form in 1858 by Darwin and Wallace. In physics, the notion of cosmic evolution became orthodox in the late 1960s as a consequence of the Big Bang theory of the origin of the universe. Now we see everything as evolutionary in nature. This means that there is a continuing creativity in all realms of nature. Is this all a matter of blind chance, a materialist's belief? Or are there guiding intelligences at work in the evolutionary process? As far as I know, one of the first people to explore this possibility was Alfred Russel Wallace. After he and Darwin together published the theory of evolution by natural selection, Darwin went on to develop a gloomy materialism, which now pervades the thinking of Neo-Darwinism, the orthodox doctrine of academic biology. All of evolution must have happened by chance and through unconscious laws of nature, and it has no meaning or purpose. By contrast, Wallace came to the conclusion that evolution involved more than natural selection and was guided by creative intelligences, which he identified with angels. His conception is summarized in the title of his last book, The World of Life, a manifestation of creative power, directive mind, and ultimate purpose. We hear a great deal about Darwin today, but we don't hear much about Wallace. I am fascinated that these very different conceptions of evolution were expressed by the two founders of evolutionary theory. They show that evolution can be interpreted in quite different ways. If you are a materialist, evolutionary creativity can only be a matter of blind chance. But if you believe there are other forces or intelligences in the universe, then there are other possible sources of creativity, whether you call them angels or not. This raises a problem that Aquinas and other medieval thinkers did not and could not deal with, namely the role of angels in evolution. For example, a new galaxy appears. Presumably, the appropriate angels that govern the galaxy must come into being with the galaxy unless all the angels are there waiting at the moment of the Big Bang for their moment to come. Matthew, And maybe angels are recycled, like those that hovered over the dinosaurs. They would otherwise have been out of a job for 60 million years. Rupert: these are questions that were inconceivable in the Middle Ages. Our evolutionary cosmology does not have less room for angels, but vastly more. Matthew: yes, I feel very strongly that as a living cosmology comes back, the angels are returning because they are part of any sound cosmology. Maybe the angels themselves will bring into our culture some of the imagination that we're calling for. In my coming book, The Coming of the Cosmic Christ, I coined the term deep ecumenism. For me, deep ecumenism is going beyond the level of world religions relating to one another in terms of doctrine and theological study papers, and entering more into their mystical traditions and doing prayer and ritual together. All religious traditions that we know of have something to say about angels, spirits other than human beings. Buck Goshorse, a Lakota spiritual teacher, once said to me, "What you Christians call angels, we Indians call spirits." This is common ground on which all our religious traditions can come together today in deep ecumenism. Angels are not labeled Buddhist, Muslim, Hindu, Lutheran, Anglican, and Roman Catholic. They are beyond denominationalism. Clearly, angels will be part of the movement of deep ecumenism. We are living in a moment in history when we as species have to ask, what do we have in common? The boundaries are melting between cultures and religions. This makes it important to have a serious discussion of our tradition of angels in the West, not out of jingoism, but out of knowing our own tradition well enough so that when we encounter angels and spirits from other traditions, we are not put off or threatened by them. Instead, we can look for the common links, the common truths among the traditions. The shamanistic traditions of the world are particularly important in our search for wisdom today. Indigenous peoples lived and survived for thousands of years amid such travails as wild beasts and inclement weather and ice ages. They had to discover ways of creating community, healing, educating, and learning. There is a tremendous lore here that has almost been lost, but not entirely, and it has everything to do with spirits and with angels. When praying with Native American peoples, I have experienced remnants of it that fill a gap in my own religious experience. Our Celtic ancestors, too, had a well-developed theology of angels and spirit guardians. Rupert: yes, the awareness of non-human spirits is fundamental to the religious experience of practically every tradition, maybe from the time we became human. This may be the primordial ground of religious experience. The awareness of spirits comes before the idea of a single God. It's significant that in the Christian, Jewish, and Islamic traditions, as in the Hindu and Buddhist traditions, there is the continuing presence of a multiplicity of spirits. Even in the most monotheistic of faiths, namely Islam, we find no denial of angels. This ancient strand of religious experience is not negated, but rather amplified by the later evolution of religions. Matthew: yeah, we have one moment in human history when these spirits were excommunicated, and that is the last few hundred years, the modern era. This shows what an amazing rupture and perversion have occurred in human consciousness in the last few centuries, as we have attempted to divorce ourselves from our relationship to angels and spirits. I think this helps to explain the price we have paid in terms of ecological disaster, war, and greed. Perhaps the ultimate secularization of our relationship is to banish the angels to a place of ridicule or sentimentalism, or reduce them to mere manifestations of our own psyche. Many modern people would say, okay, people experience angels, but these are just figments of their own imagination. Angels do not exist out there. They are subjective within people's minds. It's not difficult for people to accept the subjective existence of angels. The big challenge is to recognize the objective existence of non-human intelligences, and that's the challenge that faces us now. Matthew, I also think we should extend deep ecumenism to science itself. What are the implications of today's sciences for rediscovering the rich, deep, and broad appreciation of angels that we get from the Western tradition as represented by Dionysius, Hildegard, and Aquinas? Rupert, this is very important because what science now reveals to us goes far beyond anything that any tradition in the past has been able to glimpse. They didn't have telescopes or radio telescopes or a sense of the vastness of the universe that science has opened up, or a knowledge of the variety of heavenly bodies, or the story of cosmic evolution. As we leave the old machine-like universe and make toward a more organic sense of evolving nature, we need to ask, what kinds of consciousness are there in the universe besides our own? End of introduction. Dionysius the Areopagite. Dionysius lived in the 6th century, probably in Syria. For many centuries he was wrongly identified with Dionysius the Areopagite, converted by St. Paul in Athens. Acts 17, verse 34. He is more correctly called Dionysius the Pseudo Areopagite, and is also known as Pseudo Dionysius. This confusion gave his writings great authority up to the 16th century, and his influence on Orthodox and Western theology has been enormous. Deeply influenced by the Neoplatonic philosopher Proclus from AD 411 to 485, he combines Neoplatonism with Christianity and his 4 principal books, the Celestial Hierarchies, Ecclesiastical Hierarchy, Divine Names, and Mystical Theology. It is in his Celestial Hierarchies that he discusses at length the 9 orders of angels as mediators from God to humankind, and it is from that book, which has been so influential in Christian angelology, that most of the following passages are taken. He has been called a modern monophysite in his theology, monophysitism being the heretical doctrine that denies the human side of Christ at the Incarnation. But at the Lateran Council of 649 AD, his works were invoked to combat more extreme monophysite thinkers, and this invocation of his work by a church council also helped embellish the doctrinal authority of his teachings, because he elaborates at such length on the 9 orders of angels that St. Paul only alludes to lightly. His angelology has greatly influenced Christian theology. The multiplicity of angels. The scriptural tradition respecting the angels gives their number as thousands and thousands and 10,000 times 10,000, multiplying and repeating the very highest numbers we have, thus clearly showing that the orders of the celestial beings are innumerable for us. So many are the blessed hosts of the supermundane intelligences, wholly surpassing the feeble and limited range of our material numbers. Matthew. Dionysius is putting his discussion of angels in the context of the vastness of the cosmos and talking about the numbers being innumerable to us. Centuries later, Meister Eckhart would say that the angels outnumber the grains of sand on the earth. So what we're talking about here is a vast array, a vast challenge to our imaginations. Go beyond numbers as we know them. Just keep adding zeros to get a sense of angelic numbers. Rupert. Since vast numbers are usually called astronomical, it brings to mind the obvious connection with the stars. We now recognize a cosmos full of innumerable galaxies, each containing billions of stars. When we look at the night sky, we see only the stars in our own galaxy, the Milky Way being the main part of it. Insofar as angels are connected with the stars, then this would literally give us an astronomical number of angels. Matthew. Astronomical numbers and astronomical beings. Rupert. Yes, and if we also think of angels being connected with all the different kinds of being in nature, then we have to consider the millions of biological species on this earth and probably on billions of other planets around other stars and in other galaxies. And then these planets themselves are organisms, as is our planet, Gaia. The vast numbers of forms of organization in nature dwarf our imagination, just as Dionysius says the numbers of angels do. Matthew. It seems appropriate in that context to turn to one of Dionysius' favorite themes, hierarchy. In fact, he seems to have invented the word itself in this book with the title The Celestial Hierarchies. Hierarchies, fields, and light. Hierarchy is, in my opinion, a holy order and knowledge and activity which, so far as is attainable, participates in the divine likeness and is lifted up to the illuminations given it from God and correspondingly towards the imitation of God. Now the beauty of God, being unific, good, and the source of all perfection, is wholly free from dissimilarity and bestows its own light upon each according to his merit, and in the most divine mysteries perfects them in accordance with the unchangeable fashioning of those who are being perfected harmoniously to itself. The aim of hierarchy is the greatest possible assimilation to and union with God, and by taking him as leader in all holy wisdom, to become like him so far as is permitted, by contemplating intently his most divine beauty. Also, it molds and perfects its participants in the holy image of God like bright and spotless mirrors, which receive the ray of the supreme deity, which is the source of light. And being mystically filled with the gift of light, it pours it forth again abundantly, according to the divine law, upon those below itself. For it is not lawful for those who impart or participate in the holy mysteries to overpass the bounds of its sacred laws, nor must they deviate from them if they seek to behold, as far as it is allowed, that deific splendor, and to be transformed into the likeness of those divine intelligences. Therefore, he who speaks of hierarchy implies a certain perfectly holy order in the likeness of the first divine beauty, ministering the sacred mystery of its own illuminations in hierarchical order and wisdom, being in due measure conformed to its own principle. For each of those who is allotted a place in the divine order finds his perfection in being uplifted according to his capacity towards the divine likeness. And what is still more divine, he becomes, as the scriptures say, a fellow worker with God, and shows forth the divine activity revealed as far as possible in himself. For the holy constitution of the hierarchy ordains that some are purified, others purify. Some are enlightened, others enlighten. Some are perfected, others make perfect. For in this way the divine imitation will fit each one. Rupert, what Dionysius says here is related to the Neoplatonic conception of emanations from the One, the source from which things flow out. The idea of a chain of being was very important in the ancient world and remained a common theme in literature right up until modern times. There is a source of being, and then every grade of being below that, becoming more and more dimmed the farther descent into matter. That seems to me the Neoplatonic background of Dionysus' thinking. Would you agree? Matthew. Yes, and I find that difficult to deal with today. The idea of everything emanating from a source is fine. That's certainly the image I get from the creation story today. Everything beginning with a tiny pinprick of a fireball. But the idea that beings have to be distant from matter to be spiritual is, I think, one of the great mistakes made by Hellenistic thinking, and it's set up as for all kinds of dualism. Also, I think there's another implication in his language. For example, in his very first sentence, the language of being lifted up. The idea of pouring out from the top down sets us up to disparage what is below, whether that is the earth we stand on or the lower chakras of our own nature. There are inherent problems in Neoplatonism that I'm uncomfortable with. The coming together of energy in matter and spirit in matter in our century has managed to dispel these misconceptions based on dualism of matter versus spirit. But The way Dionysius describes hierarchy is interesting. A holy order and knowledge and activity participating in the divine likeness, and of course, responding toward an imitation of God. That kind of understanding is useful. It's interesting that his next definition of hierarchy is about the beauty of God, the very first gift that he's alluding to as flowing out from the source is beauty and light. For him, beauty is light. And I think that's very wonderful. I think the recovery of the sense of beauty as being another name for the divine is very important today. It's behind the passion for eco-justice, for example. Beauty is one of the great energy sources that we have as individuals, and our experience of beauty is what we share as a species. Rupert, but isn't there a problem with the image of God as the source of light? It implies that you've got the brightest source at the top, and farther away you get more mixing in with darkness, and the darkness then becomes another Neoplatonic way of conceiving of matter. Matthew, exactly. Rupert, darkness in this view is not part of the divine. It's a negative principle. If we see darkness and light as polar principles within the divine, then we get a different view. We get a bottom-up as well as a top-down view. We see that the intermingling of light and matter, the flowing down from a bright source, is not entirely negative or a dilution of some primary divine principle. Matthew, I had that experience when I stayed awake all night in the woods, and I realized that the night is not just the absence of the sun. It has its own energy. The darkness moves in, and it has its own energy and its own power, and this is lost in the Neoplatonic view of things. They put down matter, and they put down darkness, and they put down. Meister Eckhart says, up is down and down is up, and that's much more contemporary. Buckminster Fuller says anyone using the words up and down is 400 years out of date because in a curved universe, things go in and out, but they don't go up and down. So I think that the notion of climbing Jacob's ladder, the whole archetype of climbing up, can be an escape from materia. Mater, mother, matter, the earth, this is part of the hierarchical worldview that Neoplatonism takes for granted, and we can't be at home with that today. It also has profound political implications. For example, in this text itself, there's a statement, a footnote that is quite troubling. It's a quote from Proclus, who was one of the influential Neoplatonic philosophers. Quote, "The peculiarity of purity is to keep more excellent natures exempt from such as are subordinate." End of quote. That definition of purity is keep your hands clean from those who are below you. It would certainly feed any temptations to case consciousness. It endorses the untouchable mentality, and that's again what distinguishes this Neoplatonic philosophy of Proclus, Plotinus, and Dionysius from the biblical tradition that honors the poorer things of life as being pure in their own right, welcome in the circle of beings in which we all live. Aboriginal people think in terms of the circle of being, not the ladder, so the question arises, can we shift this archetype of the chain of being to see it more as a circle or a spiral and not as a ladder? Rupert, I think so, but I also think there is value in the up and down imagery. When we look up, we see the sky. Looking up to the heavens is very important. I think that most of us in the modern world don't look up enough. Our gaze is fixed down on the earth and the things of the earth. Almost everything we buy and sell comes from the earth, as well as the money we buy and sell it with. The heavens, the celestial environment, the limitless potentiality of space, the vast variety of celestial beings is simply not in our gaze at all. Matthew, are we really looking up or are we looking out? For example, if you get high enough, say on a mountain or from an airplane or a satellite, you know you're looking out, and that's really when the universe gets vast. In other words, we're only looking out in this limited way because our eyes are not in the top of our heads. It's kind of our biological problem that we have to tilt our heads to see some stars, but not always. When there are horizons, I like that word, horizons, we're looking out beyond the earth. And I'm thinking now of what they call the big sky in Montana, where you really do feel the horizon out there. You can see the sky just by looking straight ahead. And I remember once in South Dakota coming out of a sweat lodge, and the Milky Way was absolutely on fire. You could see all the stars, but they ran like a rainbow from flat Earth into a curved space all the way to flat Earth again. But as you say, in cities, people are forced to look up more because we've destroyed the horizon. In any case, I couldn't agree more with your basic point, because it's the vastness of the cosmos that we're missing in the way we look. I agree that looking out is a good way to put it, and the best way of looking at the stars is to lie down. Then you can look without straining your neck, and you can really appreciate the sky. I imagine that the earliest stargazers were people like shepherds who slept under the sky. Looking out at the horizon is also an important way. Most megaliths in the ancient world, like Stonehenge, were observatories for viewing the rising and the setting of the celestial bodies against the horizon. These stones divided up the horizon into arcs or regions. The idea of hierarchy is important in another way. In any holistic worldview, for example, Whitehead's organismic philosophy of nature, or the holistic worldview as it's developing today within science and philosophy, the essence is that at each level of organization, the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Nature is composed of a series of different levels, and this is usually called a hierarchy. It's best called a nested hierarchy because there are levels within levels. For example, within a crystal, considered as a whole, you have molecules, and each of the molecules within the crystal is itself a whole made up of atoms. And each atom is an organism of its own, with its nucleus and its electrons in orbit around it. And then each nucleus is a whole of its own, consisting of neutrons, protons, and forces that hold them together, and so on. We see these multiple levels of organization everywhere. Our own bodies, for example, are wholes containing organs, tissues, cells, organelles, and molecules. And we, as individual organisms, are part of larger systems. We're part of societies, and societies are like an organism at a higher level, and they're within ecosystems. And then there's the planet, Gaia, and then the solar system, which is a kind of organism. Then there's the galaxy, and then groups of galaxies. When you look at nature this way, at every level, you find a wholeness that is more than the sum of the parts, and this wholeness includes the parts within it. There's no way you can have a planet separate from a solar system. It's got to be part of this larger whole. You can't have solar systems separate from galaxies, as far as we know. It's rather like the way that San Francisco is a city within the United States. The United States is bigger than San Francisco, and the United States in turn is just one part of the American continent. We're familiar with this pattern of organization in every sense, geographically, in the way that nature is constituted, and even in the way our language is organized with phonemes in syllables, syllables in words, words in phrases, phrases in sentences. All are nested hierarchies. Another word for nested hierarchy was suggested by Arthur Koestler, holarchy. He preferred the word holarchy because it got away from the connotation of priestly rule. The nested hierarchies or holarchies of nature help us make sense of what Dionysius is talking about. We can see the angelic hierarchies in this inclusive sense. For example, some angels could correspond to the angels of galaxies, others to the angels of solar systems, and still others to those of planets. This is actually how the celestial hierarchies were often pictured, in a series of concentric spheres. Matthew: I think it's also a relationship of 3 dimensions. If you make it 2 dimensions on the latter, then you're stuck with that dominating and domineering motif. But if you see these as spheres within spheres, they're not standing on top of each other giving one and the other orders. They have their own space and their own configuration. One point I'd like to emphasize in Dionysius' statement on hierarchy is his remark that each being, according to his capacity, takes part in the divine order and divine likeness, and becomes, as the scriptures say, a fellow worker with God, and shows forth the divine activity. He says hierarchy is holy order, knowledge, and activity. Activity flows from this participation in beauty, and being a fellow worker with God is, as he says, divine imitation. I think that gives a dynamic dimension to his sense of hierarchy. I like very much the term holarchy. We have to come up with other words because the word hierarchy was born so much weight, perhaps far beyond anything Dionysius intended. Political oppression and other things are included in it. Actually, I think the best part of the word hierarchy is higher. In English, when most people hear the word hierarchy, they think it means high. Those who are up high exploiting those below, but of course it doesn't. Hieros is Greek and it means sacred. It's because we've lost the sense of the sacred in the heavens and on earth that we're in the trouble we're in. Rupert: I think holarchy is fine because actually what higher means is not just sacred but holy, and holy has the same root in English as whole. Likewise in Greek, holos means a whole. Matthew: another powerful phrase he uses here is divine beauty. Molds and perfects its participants in the holy image of God, like bright and spotless mirrors which receive the ray of the supreme deity, which is the source of light. Hildegard says every creature is a glittering and glistening mirror of divinity. That's the tradition, and it's a wonderful tradition. God looks at us in a mirror and sees the God self. We are divine mirrors, and of course mirrors need light. A mirror in the dark is no good as a mirror. Mirrors are needy. They have to receive. This theme of mirrors that he refers to is very common in the mystical tradition. In fact, the term speculative mysticism is about mirror mysticism. The Latin word for mirror is speculum. Dionysius is saying that things are mirrors of divinity. It's not about speculating and turning mysticism into a philosophical act of rationalization. It's about finding the mirror image in things. Everything mirrors God. Angels then have a special power of mirroring. Maybe it's like the refined mirrors in the Hubble telescope. There's been a leap forward in the human art of making mirrors, and this has been very important for bringing the light into our telescopes and seeing more of the universe. And the mirror is a very wonderful technological invention. I wonder who made the first mirror. I wonder how shocked the people were to look at it. Rupert: I would have thought that pools of water would have been the first mirrors, as in the myth of Narcissus. Matthew: natural mirrors. Maybe the first mirror was carrying a little pool of water around. That's good. Rupert: to continue with the idea of hierarchy, an important thing about the organization of natural holarchies is that they can be thought of as levels of organization by fields. I call these fields morphic fields, the fields that determine the form and organization of the system. We can think of a galaxy as having its field, a solar system as having its field, and a planet as having its field. The levels of inclusive organization are also levels of inclusive fields. Even without my theory of morphic fields, we still have the idea of a galactic gravitational field, of the solar gravitational field that holds the entire solar system together and makes the planet go round the sun, and of the Earth's gravitational field holding us all on the Earth and causing the moon to orbit the Earth. There are also the magnetic fields of the galaxy, the sun and the Earth, and their associated electric fields. Even if we stick to the limited conceptions of fields at present available within science, we see we've got nested hierarchies of fields, or a holarchy of fields. The same goes for the electromagnetic fields within a crystal. Within the crystal field are the molecular fields. Within those, the atomic fields, the fields of the electrons and the atomic nucleus. These are not only electromagnetic fields, but the quantum matter fields. In many ways, the modern conception of fields has superseded the traditional conception of souls as invisible organizing entities. Up until the 17th century, even electricity and magnetism were described in terms of souls, stretching out invisibly beyond the magnet or electrically charged body and capable of acting at a distance. Fields are a contemporary way of thinking about the invisible organizing principles of nature. Historically, these invisible organizing principles were thought of as souls. The soul of the universe, the anima mundi, has been replaced by the gravitational field. The magnetic soul has been replaced by the magnetic field. The electric soul by the electric field. The vegetative souls of plants and animals, the souls organizing the growth of the embryo and the body, have been replaced in modern developmental biology by morphogenic fields. The animal soul can be replaced by the fields of instinct and behavior, and our mental activity can be understood in terms of mental fields. Matthew. Getting away from the idea that the soul is in the body, let's just say the body is in the soul. How distant, how near to the horizon can our soul fields roam? In other words, our thoughts, our hopes, our dreams, our passions, our knowledge. In some way, everything we're talking about is encapsulated in our soul field. We can only talk about what we know or imagine we know, and so in many ways, our field, that is, our souls, are growing as we reach to the perimeters of the universe. So there is an awakening of the human field, you might say. We are moving away from the smallness of soul in the pineal gland of cerebral cortex that the modern era gave to soul as the encapsulating dynamic, the consciousness of everything that we know. Rupert. I agree. I think our knowledge does reach out from our brains to include that which we perceive, that which we experience, and that which we know. Our mental fields are vastly larger than our brains, and as our conceptions enlarge and extend, as our sense of the cosmos enlarges, our field becomes cosmic in scope. Insofar as we see angels as organized hierarchically, perhaps we can see them as associated with angel fields. Angels themselves could be thought of as a particulate manifestation of the activity of these fields, just as photons are a particulate way of thinking about the activity, the energy carried in electromagnetic fields. So angelic beings, like quantum beings, may well have a double aspect, a distributed aspect to do with the region of activity with which they're concerned, and manifestations as quanta of activity. Matthew. Somehow we're talking about photon and field coming together in the light. Angel light. Rupert. And their traditional role is as interconnectors, as messengers. The very name angel comes from this meaning of messenger. So they're things that link together, and connecting together is what fields do. Matthew. And as messengers, how appropriate they are returning in our time, since we're rediscovering the habit of the universe known as interconnectivity. When we conceived of the universe as being disconnected or isolated, the angels had to go on vacation. Their main task is connecting and interconnecting, and there was not much for them to do within the world machine. I like the idea of the angel as connector. The tradition is that some connect in terms of knowledge and guiding, some in terms of healing, some in terms of defending, some in terms of inspiring. So it makes sense in a time when we're rediscovering the interconnectivity that these angels who seem to connect one pole of a relation to another are going to have a lot of employment. We should put up a sign, angels needed. There's plenty of work for angels in a period of interconnectivity. Rupert. And of course, interconnectivity within fields is not a one-way process. If I have a big magnet with a strong magnetic field, and I place a smaller magnet nearby, the field of the bigger magnet both influences and is influenced by the field of the smaller magnet. If I move the smaller magnet, this affects the entire field. Matthew. Now there we have a good analogy for healthy hierarchy or holarchy. There is mutual influence, where the big magnet is not just telling the little magnet what to do, but there's a give and take. Rupert. Gravity, even according to Newton, works on that principle. All matter attracts all other matter in the universe. There's the idea of a mutual connection there, not just a one-way influence. Following Einstein, we now see this mutual interconnectivity as mediated through gravitational fields, all contained within the gravitational field of the universe, the universal field. Insofar as we think of whatever affects us as being mediated through messengers or invisible connections or angels, then something of what's happening to us and what's happening to the world will be conveyed back through the angelic field to more inclusive levels of organization, to more inclusive fields of consciousness. Matthew. The image of fields is so much healthier to me than the basic image we get of a ladder. A field is three-dimensional. Rupert. Angels operate in fields of activity, coordinating and connecting. Material bodies are mutually exclusive. You can't have two billiard balls in the same place at the same time, but fields can interpenetrate. For example, the room in which we're sitting is filled with the Earth's gravitational field, which is why we're not floating in the air. Interpenetrating the gravitational field is the electromagnetic field through which we see each other, which is also full of radio waves, TV transmissions, cosmic rays, ultraviolet and infrared rays, all sorts of invisible radiations. There also doesn't interfere with one another. Radio waves interfere with one another only if they're at the same frequency, but all the radio programs and TV programs in the world can coexist, interpenetrating the same space and not canceling one another out or denying one another. Even if we take only the fields that orthodox science currently recognizes, quantum matter fields, electromagnetic fields, and gravitational fields, they all interpenetrate. And so the idea of angels as field-like allows us to see how they too can interpenetrate. Matthew. What I like about the word field is that it is an everyday word. Field has a sense of space to it. It feels like an invitation to play. One plays in a field. Also, things grow in a field. A field is generative. It is a place of life and activity. It's also about having your feet on the ground. It's matter, it's earth, it's life bubbling up from below. It's an honoring of the lower chakras. I think fields are a wonderfully rich metaphor for bringing angels down to earth, and yet they are three-dimensional. So I want to honor the word field in its non-scientific connotation. It too speaks to us of something everyday and something welcoming. We can also rediscover the meaning of the word receptive. In a way, a field is a mirror. It's pulling in the light and converting it into life through photosynthesis and into food. Wonderful things come from fields. Obviously, all food comes from fields, pastures and orchards and romping places and all ball games. Gay is playing of fields. She invites people to play. Yesterday here in London, I was watching football players kicking the ball in Regent's Park, and I had this experience that Gaia is not just land. Gaia is these two-legged creatures with a rubber ball playing on the land. But for all that play, you need fields to play in. And what are the relationships? What is a marriage but an effort to create a field? What is a home but a field? Children bringing new beings into the world and bearing those who die and everything that passes in between. It's living life in fields, fields of interconnectivity. Rupert. When Faraday first used the word field in science, he was using an ordinary English word that had all these implications already built into it. The primary meaning is agricultural field, and this gives rise to the general sense of a field as a region of activity, as in battlefield, field of interest, and field of view. A field is where you do something. To make fields, the first agriculturists usually had to cut down the trees, then they grew things in the cleared space. If we stop cultivating fields, if we stop carrying out the activity of agriculture, the fields revert to forest, as in much of New England. Then we have another kind of field, the natural, self-organizing field of the forest. Participation and revelation. Whereof all things share in that providence which streams forth from the superessential deific source of all, for they would not be unless they had come into existence through participation in the essential principle of all things. All inanimate things participate in it through their being, for the to be of all things is the divinity above being itself in true life. Living things participate in its life-giving power above all life. Rational things participate in its self-perfect and preeminent perfect wisdom above all reason and intellect. It is manifest, therefore, that those natures which are around the Godhead have participated of it in manifold ways. On this account, the holy ranks of these celestial beings are present with and participate in the divine principle in a degree far surpassing all those things which merely exist, and irrational living creatures and rational human beings, for molding themselves intelligibly to the imitation of God and looking into a supermundane way to the likeness of the Supreme Deity, and longing to form the intellectual appearance of it, they naturally have more abundant communion with him, and with unremitting activity they tend to eternally up the steep, as far as is permitted, through the ardor of their unwearying divine love, and they receive the primal radiance in a pure and immaterial manner, adapting themselves to this in a life wholly intellectual. Such, therefore, are they who participate first, and in an all various manner in deity, and reveal first, and in many ways, the divine mysteries, whereof they, above all, are preeminently worthy of the name angel, because they first receive the divine light, and through them are transmitted to us the revelations which are above us. Now, if anyone should say that God has shown himself without intermediary to certain holy men, let him know beyond doubt from the most holy scriptures that no man has ever seen, nor shall see, the hidden being of God. But God has shown himself according to revelations which are fitting to God, to his faithful servants in holy visions adapted to the nature of the seer. The divine theology, in the fullness of its wisdom, very rightly applies the name theophany to that beholding of God which shows the divine likeness, figured in itself as a likeness in form of that which is formless, through the uplifting of those who contemplate to the divine, inasmuch as a divine light is shed upon the seers through it, and they are initiated in some participation of divine things. By such divine visions our venerable forefathers were instructed through the mediation of these celestial powers. Is it not told in the Holy Scriptures that the sacred law was given to Moses by God himself in order to teach us that in it is mirrored the divine and holy law? Furthermore, theology wisely teaches that it was communicated to us by angels, as though the authority of the divine law decreed that the second should be guided to the divine majesty by the first. Within each hierarchy there are first, middle, and last ranks and powers, and the higher are initiators and guides of the lower to the divine approach and illumination and union. I see that angels too were first initiated into the divine mystery of Jesus in his love for man, and through them the gift of that knowledge was bestowed upon us. For the divine Gabriel announced to Zechariah the high priest that the son who should be born to him through divine grace, when he was bereft of hope, would be a prophet of that Jesus who would manifest the union of the human and divine natures through the ordinance of the good law for the salvation of the world. And he revealed to Mary how of her should be born the divine mystery of the ineffable incarnation of God. Another angel taught Joseph that the divine promise made to his forefather David should be perfectly fulfilled. Another brought to the shepherds the glad tidings as to those purified by quiet withdrawal from the many, and with him a multitude of the heavenly host gave forth to all the dwellers upon earth our often sung hymn of adoring praise. Participation is one of the important concepts in Dionysius' work, and I think it's still an important word. In fact, it's certainly part of the new paradigm thinking, going from subject to object relationships to participatory relationships. We all participate in the power of the source. All things, even inanimate things, participate in their being. Living things participate in life-giving power. Rational things participate in wisdom. It's interesting that Dionysius says wisdom and not knowledge. Wisdom includes the heart, so it's a very inclusive kind of knowledge. The natures that are around God participate more fully because they have more abundant communion with the Godhead. That's a nice phrase, abundant communion. This is the source of the angels, their abundant communion. They receive their primal radiance in a pure manner. They are receptive to light and to radiance. The word radiance, too, is an important word that is carried through in the mystical traditions. The word doxa in the scriptures means glory or radiance, and the Shekinah, the Jewish tradition of the feminine face of God, is a radiant presence of God. It's about the presence. So the question is not about whether God exists. It's about where is the presence? Where is the radiance? Show me the radiance. Angels were those who first received the divine light, who first felt the radiance, according to Dionysius, and they in turn transmit revelation to us. So it's interesting that he connects revelation to participation and to the reception of light. He moves on to talk about people experiencing holy visions and theophanies. Theophany is a wonderful word for the beholding of the divine. Finally, he applies it to the scriptures and to the Jesus story. The angels initiated the divine mystery of Jesus. There are many examples of angels in the Jesus story. The angel who announced John the Baptist's birth, the angel who announced Jesus' birth, the angel who told Joseph what to do, the angels who appeared to the shepherds before Jesus' birth, and so on. Participation becomes revelation, coming from the place of abundant communion, the Godhead. The presence of angels at these events in Jesus' life are indicators of the honoring of the cosmic Christ in Jesus, for where angels are, there too are the cosmic forces. Rupert, I too like the term participation. It gives a sense of the divine life immanent in all things, and intimate, living, and rational creatures. It implies not only a movement from the divine into us, but also that we are part of the life of the divine being. One thing that comes up again and again in these old discussions of angels that is not clear to me is the idea that they receive the primal radiance in a pure and immaterial manner, adapting themselves to this in a life wholly intellectual. Dionysius was writing from within the Neoplatonic tradition, and his meaning of wholly intellectual was very different from ours. Perhaps you could clarify that, because it's obvious he doesn't mean somebody who's only in his or her head. The word intellectual had a larger sense than we usually give it today. Is that right? Matthew: yes, I think words that come closer to it today would be a full consciousness. Theoria in Greek really meant what we mean by meditation. So it's bringing heart and head together in contemplation. But I also have trouble with that, especially in the context where he talks about a pure and immaterial manner. Again, we're back to the Neoplatonic supposition that you have to be immaterial to be pure and intellectual to be pure and radiant. And I think that here is a source of a lot of our dualistic difficulties in the West. I don't find this totally redeemable. I think this is really coming out of a culture that is ill at ease with matter and whose whole philosophy supported that. Matter is at the bottom rung of a chain of being and is only tolerated. Rupert: this Neoplatonic understanding of matter involved a negation of spiritual principles and gave darkness a negative meaning. Then, through the scientific revolution and materialism, matter took on a different meaning. It was the real stuff of things. For the materialist, matter was the foundation of everything and was conceived of as hard and enduring, but its meaning has changed again in the light of the modern physics. Matter is made of energy bound within fields, and therefore matter is a structure of activity. The fields themselves are actually immaterial. The electromagnetic field, the gravitational field, are not made of matter. Rather, as Einstein said, matter is made of fields. Matter is energy bound within fields, more a process than a thing. Matthew, it's as if we've gone from one end of the pendulum to the other. First, matter is the problem, and then spirit is the problem. But, as you say, we're coming closer to a midpoint. I think the word energy helps a lot. Aquinas defines spirit at one point as the elan, the impulse that's in everything. So spirit is as much a part of matter as it is of non-matter. That's another reason why I think the term field is so healthy today. It allows us to honor different expressions of energy, sometimes as matter and sometimes as pure relationship. Matter is not a thing in itself, it's a relations and rather immaterial. Rupert, quite. It's even immaterial in the literal sense. An atom is more than 99.9% empty space, or rather, it is full of fields. Electrons, protons, and neutrons are vibratory patterns within these fields, but insofar as they are regarded as particles, they occupy only a tiny part of the space. Revelation is rather a dry term, the way it's used by theologians. I like Dionysus' idea of it as an aspect of participation in divine wisdom and activity. Matthew, exactly. Again, it's about relationship, participating in life and wisdom. The image that I have is of a fish in water. The water's in the fish, and the fish is in the water. This imagery of participation in the divinity, in the source, is quite an affront to theism. It's a pantheistic. It's the idea that everything is somehow bathed in the divine, and the divine is washing through everything. Again, it's not about leaving the earth or going up a ladder to find the divine. It's about waking up to the theophany, the beholding of the divine all around us and within. The term participation carries that kind of active, dynamic relationship within divinity. Rupert, another implication of this passage is that the angels first participate in what's going to happen, and then they help bring it about. For example, he says, I see that the angels too were first initiated into the divine mystery of Jesus in his love for man, and through them the gift of that knowledge was bestowed upon us. There's a sense in which the angels are a creative power. They are part of the creative agency through which the development or unfolding or evolution of events happens. Matthew, the word revelation etymologically means to lift the veil, remove the curtain, disclose. It's like a stage show. The curtain's just rising, and everyone's very excited about this show in which they're about to participate. As you say, the word revelation has been watered down. The energy's been taken out of it, and it's come to mean a handing down of dogma. But really, it's about the lifting of veils of illusion and disillusion and projection, to allow reality and beauty and grace to shine through. The coupling of participation and revelation brings back some of that dynamic character. Anything that's truly revelatory is exciting. It awakens. The different kinds of angels. The 9 choirs of angels according to the classification of Dionysus. First order, seraphim, cherubim, thrones. Second order, dominions, virtues, powers. Third order, principalities, archangels, angels. The first order. We are told by Hebrew scholars that the holy name seraphim means those who kindle or make hot, and cherubim denotes abundance of knowledge or an outflowing of wisdom. Reasonably, therefore, is this first celestial hierarchy administered by the most transcendent natures, since it occupies a more exalted place than all the others, being immediately present with God, and because of its nearness to it are brought the first revelations and perfections of God before the rest. Therefore they are named the glowing ones, streams of wisdoms, thrones, an illustration of their divine nature. The name seraphim clearly indicates their ceaseless and eternal evolution about divine principles, their heat and keenness, the exuberance of their intense, perpetual, tireless activity, and their elevative and energetic assimilation of those below, kindling them and firing them to their own heat, and wholly purifying them by a burning and all-consuming flame, and by the unhidden, unquenchable, changeless, radiant, and enlightening power, dispelling and destroying the shadow of darkness. The name cherubim denotes their power in knowing and beholding God, their receptivity to the highest gift of light, their contemplation of the beauty of the Godhead in its first manifestation, and that they are filled by participation in divine wisdom and boundless outpour to those below them from their own fount of wisdom. The name of the most glorious and exalted thrones denotes that which is exempt from and untainted by any base and earthly thing, and the supermundane ascent up the steep. For these have no part in that which is lowest, but dwell in the fullest power, immovably and perfectly established in the Most High, and receive the divine immanence above all passion and matter, and manifest God, being attentively open to divine participations. Therefore, the first order of the holy angels possesses above all others the characteristic of fire, and the abundant participation of divine wisdom, and the possession of the highest knowledge of the divine illuminations, and the characteristic of thrones, which symbolizes openness to the reception of God. The second order. The name given to the holy dominions signifies, I think, a certain unbounded elevation to that which is above, freedom from all that is of the earth, and from all inward inclination to the bondage of discord, a liberal superiority to harsh tyranny, an exemptness from degrading servility and from all that is low, for they are untouched by an inconsistency. They are true lords, perpetually aspiring to true lordship and to the source of lordship, and they provincially fashion themselves and those below them, as far as possible, into the likeness of true lordship. They do not turn towards vain shadows, but wholly give themselves to that true authority, forever one with the godlike source of lordship. The name of the holy virtues signifies a certain powerful and unshakable virility welling forth into all their godlike energies, not being weak and feeble for any reception of the divine illuminations granted to it, mounting upwards in fullness of power to an assimilation with God, never failing away from the divine life through its own weakness, but ascending unwaveringly to the superessential virtue which is the source of virtue, fashioning itself as far as it may in virtue, perfectly tuned towards the source of virtue, and flowing forth providentially to those below it, abundantly filling them with virtue. The name of the holy powers, co-equal with the divine dominions and virtues, signifies an orderly and unconfined order in the divine receptions, and the regulation of intellectual and supermundane power which never debases its authority by tyrannical force, but is irresistibly urged onward in due order to the divine. It beneficently leads those below it, as far as possible, to the supreme power which is the source of power, which it manifests after the manner of angels in the well-ordered ranks of its own authoritative power. The third order. The name of the celestial principalities signifies their godlike princeliness and authoritativeness in an order which is holy and most fitting to the princely powers, and that they are wholly turned towards the Prince of Princes, and lead others in princely fashion, and that they are formed as far as possible in the likeness of the source of principality, and reveal its superessential order by the good order of the princely powers. The choir of the holy archangels is placed in the same threefold order as the celestial principalities, for as has been said, there is one hierarchy and order which includes these and the angels. But since each hierarchy has first, middle, and last ranks, the holy order of archangels, through its middle position, participates in the two extremes, being joined with the most holy principalities and with the holy angels. For the angels, as we have said, fill up and complete the lowest choir of all the hierarchies of the celestial intelligences, since they are the last of the celestial beings possessing the angelic nature. And they indeed are more properly named angels by us than are those of a higher rank, because their choir is more directly in contact with manifested and mundane things. Michael is called Lord of the people of Judah, and other angels are assigned to other peoples. There is one ruler of all, and to him the angels who minister to each nation lead their followers. Pharaoh was shown through visions by the angel who presided over the Egyptians, and the prince of Babylon was shown by his own angel, the watchful and overruling power of providence. And for those nations, the servants of the true God were appointed as leaders, the interpretation of angelic visions having been revealed from God through angels to holy men near to the angels, like Daniel and Joseph. There is one providence established superessentially above all the invisible and visible powers, and all the angels who proceed over the different nations lift up to that providence, as to their own principle, as far as is in their power, those who willingly follow them. Matthew. We saw earlier that Dionysius counted an astronomical number of angels, but he also attempts to classify them, categorize them, put them into groups. Dionysius is not the only one to do this. St. Ambrose had a list of 9 types of angels, St. Jerome 7, St. Gregory the Great 9, St. Isidore of Seville 9, Moses Maimonides in the Middle Ages had 10, St. John of Damascus had 9, Dante had 9, St. Thomas Aquinas followed the classification of Dionysius. It seems these efforts to categorize angels are in fact efforts to name the 9 spheres of the universe, 7 planets and their domains thought of as spheres, plus the Earth sphere and the sphere of the fixed stars. This is important because it shows psyche and cosmos coming together. It shows how the ancient wisdom was cosmological. It was not anthropocentric, and it wasn't seeing the soul as being inside the body. I think in picturing these 9 spheres, we can also think of them as related to the microcosm of the human person, to the chakras. So we have the microcosm of the celestial spheres and the microcosm of the human spheres. The angels are connectors, administrators, messengers that touch and connect the microcosm, the human being, and integrate us with the spheres of cosmic force. Dionysius makes very ecumenical statements about the angels assigned to other nations, how angels guided Pharaoh and the prince of Babylon, as well as the biblical figures of Daniel and Joseph. He calls for a kind of angelic ecumenism when he sees that there is only one providence, and all the angels serve this one providence. Rupert. I like the idea of the microcosm and the macrocosm being related, the ordering of our psyches and bodies being related to the ordering of the heavens. The microcosm and macrocosm correspondence helps us to avoid falling into the idea that celestial powers have no relation to us, or falling into the trap of psychological reductionism, regarding all these things as projections of archetypes within the human psyche. In his rather confusing classification of angels, Dionysius doesn't seem to know quite what to say about dominions, virtues, and powers. He seems to be grasping for distinctive features. The very fact that other people had different classifications shows there was no exact agreement about this, but they needed hierarchies because of the old cosmology with its series of spheres one inside the other. They needed to link the angels to the hierarchical order of the heavens as they understood it. We no longer think in terms of concentric spheres around the earth. We think of different planetary orbits around the sun, with the sun in the galaxy and our galaxy within a cluster of galaxies. We now have a much richer and more powerful notion of celestial hierarchy. Perhaps the middle hierarchy of angels, dominions, virtues, and powers could be seen as corresponding to this ordering of the heavens associated with galactic clusters, galaxies, and solar systems. Perhaps the first hierarchy, seraphim, cherubim, and thrones, are principles lying beyond and within all levels of ordering throughout the cosmos. The last hierarchy, principalities, archangels, and angels, seems to be more concerned with the ordering of things on earth. It's interesting that each nation was regarded as having its angel, not just the angel of the people, but of the place. The angel of Egypt wasn't just the angel of the Egyptian people, it was the angel of the land of Egypt. This fits with the idea found all over the ancient world of tutelary deities, the protectors of each nation and of each land. The Romans recognized them throughout their empire. For example, the guardian spirit of Britain was Britannia, still portrayed on all British paper currency. The angels protecting the regions of the earth presumably correspond to the principalities, but confusingly they seem to overlap with the archangels in this role. Michael is the protector of Israel and should be a principality rather than an archangel, according to Dionysus' classification. And then we have the angels that are related to people, such as personal guardian angels. Dionysius gives us an immensely broad sweep of levels of organization, but his classification is hard to make sense of. The fact that so many angelic taxonomies existed shows that there was confusion over the details, but they agreed on there being many levels of order within the cosmos and on earth. Matthew. They were rather strapped for details. As you point out, Dionysius' examples get thinner and thinner along the way. But as you say, maybe our much richer cosmology today gives more scope for filling in the details about fields of organization. Spirits of the place, spirits of the land, I think that's an important point. Angels are not just concerned with people, but with the land itself and all the beings that live on that land and have lived on that land, including the ancestral spirits and the animals. I like the word correspondence. It happens between microcosm and macrocosm, between the great and the local. An angelic ordering as proposed by Dionysus gives us permission to think more in terms of correspondence and less in terms of just being in a box or something. It opens the mind up, opens relationships up. Rupert. And correspondences are not merely quaint holdovers from a pre-scientific way of thinking. We have them in modern science. Through the insights of chaos theory and especially through fractal geometry, we see that certain patterns recur at different levels. In self-similar fractals, patterns occur on all scales, however large or small. In the flow of fluids, there are the same kinds of vortical patterns in a stirred cup of tea, in whirlpools, in tornadoes, and in the global atmospheric system. We see these spiral patterns in galaxies as well. We can see patterns of a similar kind at all levels of nature. Likewise, the orbits of the planets around the sun at the astronomical level are reflected in atoms, with the nucleus like the sun and the orbiting electrons like the planets. Magnetic poles exist on all scales, from the atomic level to compass needles to the magnetic polarity of the Earth and the Sun. Science has revealed many kinds of microscopic and macroscopic correspondences. From a holistic point of view, we can see correspondences in the manner in which things are organized at the different holarchic levels of nature. Matthew. There's something very exciting here. If we go back to his definition of hierarchy and substitute the word pattern, it reads, pattern is, in my opinion, a holy order and knowledge and activity. I wonder if pattern might not be a more appropriate and more contemporary naming of hierarchy. We talked about a holarchy, nested levels of wholeness, and wholeness involves pattern. Pattern somehow gets down more to the specific realm, whereas holarchy is the synthesis of it all. Take a developing egg. There's pattern forming going on inside it, and as you say, corresponding patterns are found in microcosms and macrocosms, in vortical patterns in a stirred cup of tea and in storms on the sun. Why is it that we're in such a quest for patterns? Maybe that's what this mind is about. It's either making patterns or discovering patterns. Somehow the mind seeks pattern. It is interesting that Eric Jans said that God is the mind of the universe and the mind evolves. Is that like saying that God is the pattern of the universe, the mind behind the pattern? Our quest for communion with the divine is a quest for communion with the pattern of things. So there's a great joy and great ecstasy in finding patterns. Whether we find them through science or through contemplation, patterns delight us. What is a piece of music? What is a dance? Isn't all art in some way a pattern? Maybe all creativity is an expression of a pattern. Chaos itself, we're learning, differs from order only because it has a more subtle pattern to it. Rupert. Pattern is clearly to do with form and order, and that's something that fields give to nature. Field give form, order, and pattern to things. We could say that the patterning aspect of the divine reflected in nature corresponds to the Logos principle in the Holy Trinity. This patterning activity is what Dionysius sees the cherubim as imparting. They are to do with knowledge, wisdom, and order. The seraphim are to do with light and burning with energy. They are therefore the transmitters of the dynamical aspect of the Holy Trinity, the Holy Spirit, corresponding with wind, breath, life, light, movement, inspiration. In modern science, we have fields which give patterns and energy, which gives actuality, movement, and activity. Dionysius sees the cherubim as the patterning or wisdom aspect and the seraphim as the burning or kindling aspect of the first principles underlying the manifested world. Matthew. It's interesting that the seraphim come first. The eros, the fire, the energy. This corresponds to the first chakra, and you have that in the first story in Genesis 2. The ordering principle comes after there's already energy going on, disorder. In light of what you're talking about, it's interesting to look again at how he describes seraphim in terms of ceaseless and eternal revolution, heat and keenness, the exuberance of their intense, perpetual, tireless activity, firing, unquenchable, changeless, radiant, and enlightening power, dispelling and destroying the shadows of darkness. That's an incredible description of energy, isn't it? But it's interesting that wisdom in the Jewish tradition is not identified just with logos. In fact, it's really distinct from it. It is eros, as the Book of Wisdom says. This is wisdom to love life. Not just to know about it, but to love it. Wisdom brings together logos and eros, the pattern and the energy. By itself, logos might become knowledge, but together I think they bring about wisdom. Light and fire. There is, therefore, one source of light for everything which is illuminated, namely God, who by his nature, truly and rightly, is the essence of light, and of vision. But it is ordained that in imitation of God, each of the higher ranks of beings is the source in turn for the one which follows it, since the divine rays are passed through it to the other. Therefore, the beings of all the angelic ranks naturally consider the highest order of celestial intelligences as the source after God, of all holy knowledge and imitation of God, because through them the light of the supreme God is imparted to all and to us. On this account, they refer all holy works, in imitation of God, to God as the ultimate cause, but to the first divine intelligence as the first regulators and transmitters of divine energies. The lower orders of the celestial beings participate also in this fiery, wise, and God-receptive powers, but in a lower degree, and as looking to those above them who, being thought worthy of the primary imitation of God, uplift them as far as possible into the likeness of God. We must ask in the first explanation of the forms why the Word of God prefers the sacred symbol of fire almost above all others. For you will find that it is used not only under the figure of fiery wheels, but also of living creatures of fire and of men flashing like lightning, who heap live coals of fire about the heavenly beings, and irresistibly rushing rivers of flame. Also, it says that the thrones are of fire, and it shows from their name that the most exalted seraphim themselves are burning with fire, assigning to them the qualities and forces of fire, and throughout and above below, it gives the highest preference to the symbol of fire. Therefore, I think that this image of fire signifies the perfect conformity to God of the celestial intelligences, for the holy prophets frequently liken that which is supersensual and formless to fire, which, if it may lawfully be said, possesses many resemblances as invisible things to the divine reality. For the sensible fire is in some manner in everything, and pervades all things without mingling with them, and is exempt from all things, and, although wholly bright, yet lies essentially hidden and unknown when not in contact with any substance on which it can exert its own energy. Moving other things, it comprehends but is incomprehensible, unindigent, mysteriously increasing itself and showing forth its majesty according to the nature of the substance receiving it, powerful, mighty, invisibly present to all things. When not thought of, it seems not to exist, but suddenly enkindles its light in the way proper to its nature by friction, as though seeking to do so, uncontrollably flying upwards without diminishing its all-blessed self-giving. Thus many properties of fire may be found which symbolize through sensible images the divine activities. Knowing this, those wise in the things of God have portrayed the celestial beings under the figure of fire, thus proclaiming their likeness to the divine, and their imitation of him in the measure of their power. We must now consider the representations of the celestial beings in connection with rivers and wheels and chariots. The rivers of flame denote those divine channels which fill them with superabundant and eternally outpouring streams and nourish their life-giving prolificness. The chariots symbolize the conjoined fellowship of those of the same order, the winged wheels ever moving onward, never turning back or going aside, denote the power of their progressive energy on a straight and direct path in which all their intellectual revolutions are supermundanely guided upon the straight and unswerving course. Rupert, these are wonderful passages about the primal nature of light and fire, and the importance of light and fire as divine images in the Bible and in tradition. The same imagery comes in many different forms. In the Hindu tradition, Shiva, as creator and destroyer, is portrayed as Nataraja, dancing in a ring of fire. Fire as purifier, transformer, and also a destroyer is a primal image, found all over the world. We all depend on the sun, which is fire, and all human cultures depend on the domestication of fire. The use of fire is unique to human beings. Fire has played a central role in making us human and provides a powerful source of images for all people everywhere. This central role of fire is expressed extraordinarily clearly and beautifully in these passages. The seraphim, the fiery ones, come first. And in the creation story in Genesis, the first creative act of God is to say, "Let there be light." And there is a separation of light from darkness. Dionysius' imagery of primal light and fire is paralleled in many cultures, and indeed in modern science itself. When people are trying to express this primal creative event, either they use the name Big Bang, a primary explosion in the intensest conceivable heat, or they use phrases such as the primal fireball. Modern cosmogony starts with this inconceivable heat or fire from which all things come into being. In the passage about the rivers and wheels and chariots, Dionysius talks about winged wheels ever moving onward. This image gives us a combination of movement in a line and movement in circles. Mathematically, this combination of onward movement and cycles is represented in wave equations, the physics of waves on which almost all of modern physics is grounded, is based on the mathematics of revolution of the wheel. The sine wave is what you get when you stretch out an algebraic model of the rotation of the wheel. Matthew. Chakras are represented by rotating wheels, and in east and west the chakras correspond to the heavenly spheres. The first chakra is the chakra of fire, which, as you pointed out, is oscillating and vibratory, but it is also the seed of the Kundalini, the fire that lights a fire to all the other chakra points. It is telling how other traditions celebrate the fire, and certainly fire is very important for Dionysius' worldview. He talks about the reception of the source of light, the ray of the supreme deity that we are mystically filled with. Time and again he identifies the experience of beauty with the experience of light. I think part of his preference for this image of fire and light may come from his living in the desert. This is a Syrian desert monk, so he must have learned to befriend fire and light on a daily basis. He speaks of the divine radiance of our receiving light and the essence of divinity as light. There's one source of light for everything that is illuminated. The word alone, illumination, our becoming enlightened, is obviously not restricted to the West or the Middle East, but is obviously a Buddhist idea too, the breakthrough into the light. He says that we participate in the divine ray. Again, this takes me back to the Hebrew tradition of Shekinah, which is radiance. The divine fire, the presence of the fire. Moses experiencing God in the burning bush, and the fire that accompanied the people of Israel in traversing the desert. Dionysius says that in the scriptures, the word of God prefers the sacred symbol of fire almost above all others. This image of fire signifies the perfect conformity to God of these celestial intelligences. He's really connecting to the fire of waves and photons when he says fire is in some manner in everything and pervades all things without mingling with them. That's interesting that fire doesn't give itself away. It's exempt from all things and, although wholly bright, yet lies essentially hidden and unknown, irresistible and invisible. It heats, it revives, it illuminates, it transforms, and it comprehends. It seems not to exist, but suddenly enkindles its light. I'm thinking of a fire that appears to go out, and you put some paper on it and it comes to life again. That's why he says that wise people have portrayed the celestial beings under the figure of fire, because fire is one of the richest metaphors for divinity itself. You could talk about fire in each of the chakras, for there is a fire element in all of them. The sexual fire in the second chakra, the angry fire, the passion of anger in the third chakra, the fire of warmth in the heart that melts. The first effective love is melting. As Aquinas says, the fire of the throat, the prophetic voice that speaks out, the fire of intuition, illumination, and creativity in the third eye, and then the fire of the top chakra, the crown chakra, connects to all the other fires in the universe, including the angelic fires, the celestial beings. Rupert. Whereas Dionysius talks about fire hidden in all things, science talks about energy. There's heat in all things, and it's only at absolute zero, the theoretical limit, that this vibratory thermal energy ceases. But even then, there's still the hidden energy that holds chemical bonds together, and the energy that's combined in atomic and subatomic matter, that's bound in matter by fields. As the quantum physicist David Bohm said, matter is frozen light. Light energy can be trapped in material form, in the vibratory nature of atoms and subatomic particles, and matter can give out light again. For example, in burning paper, the energy released originally came from the sun and was trapped in the leaves of trees through photosynthesis and hidden in wood. The principles of thermodynamics enunciated in the 19th century are a great unificatory insight of science. What they show is that all forms of energy can be transformed to all others, and in the heart of all things is energy. The most visible and explicit form of energy is fire, but energy is hidden in all things. The primal source of all this energy, according to modern cosmology, is the original fireball through which the universe was born. Matthew: It's interesting that one of the great sins of the spirit is inertia. What is inertia? Lack of energy, lack of fire. And Hildegard of Bingen says, "Why do you live without passion? Why do you live without blood?" In other words, where is the fire? Pentecost, a breakthrough of the spirit, comes again in the imagery of fire, the fire that melts, the fire that inspires, the fire that transforms. As you say, fire is an everyday event because photosynthesis is literally the process of converting light to food. So we eat fire when we eat food. I remember when my dog died, just putting my hand near his body, I knew it was not him because the warmth had gone. Life and warmth go together. Once I prayed in a kiva with a Hopi Indian, and we talked about praying with rattlesnakes. I asked him, "When you capture a snake and start praying with it, isn't it very nervous?" He said, "Yes, it is, but I sing to it." A snake is very sensitive to cold and heat, being a reptile, and it catches the heat of the song and calms down quickly. The idea that music and heart work can create warmth is another generator of fire and energy. Perhaps it's as potentially powerful as photosynthesis, but we haven't yet discovered how to unleash our warmth. And Hildegard says, no warmth is lost in the universe. Angels as gods. You will find, moreover, that the Word of God not only calls these celestial beings above us gods, but also gives this name to saintly men amongst us, and to those men who, in the highest degree, are lovers of God. Although the first and unmanifest God superessentially transcends all things, being enthroned above all, and therefore none of the beings or things which are can truly be said to be wholly like him, save insofar as those intellectual and rational beings who are wholly turned towards union with him, as far as in their power, and who, uplifting themselves perpetually as far as possible to the divine radiance, in the imitation of God, if it be lawful so to speak, with all their powers, are thought worthy of the same divine name. Rupert: the idea of celestial beings as gods enables the angels in Christianity, Islam, and Judaism to be related to the devas of Hinduism, known as the Shining Ones, and to the gods of many other religions. Dionysius explicitly recognized the protecting gods of Egypt and Babylon as angelic. The gods in the polytheistic religions are assimilated into monotheism by being treated as angels. If the many gods are recognized as subject to the one supreme God, they can be accepted as divine intermediaries and as divine powers. The difference between monotheism and polytheism, at first sight so stark, is softened and modified by the recognition of the angels. Matthew: that's very interesting. It certainly shows a deep ecumenical attitude on the part of Dionysius, and one wonders if the acceptance of celestial beings as gods would also apply to celestial beings as goddesses, an opening to the feminine deities as well as to the masculine ones. In the first book of Corinthians, chapter 8, verse 5, there's rather unusual and unexpected statement by St. Paul that confirms what you're talking about, where he quotes, "Even though there be so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, and indeed there are many such gods and many such lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father, from whom all things are, and we exist for him. There is one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom are all things, and we exist through him." End of that quote. And this passage is very like the cosmic Christ passages throughout the New Testament about the Christ having power over the angels, archangels, thrones, and dominions. St. Paul is making a lot of space for invisible forces and powers, but he is also establishing that there is no need to be anxious about these powers because the Christ, representing God the Creator, has power over all of them. Part of the good news is that the cosmos in which we are immersed is essentially a friendly place, because God the Creator and the Christ have the last word over what these gods or angels are busy doing. It is striking that Dionysius in this passage says that there are beings trying to imitate God who are thought worthy of the same divine name. He also uses the term divinization, what the West calls our sanctification, the East calls our divinization. It is about the Christ nature, the God nature in all of us. It is a pity how seldom Western theologians use the term or even the concept. Meister Eckhart is an exception to this rule, however. Angels in nature. The plenitude of the infinite power of God in harmonious rhythmic measure fills all things. From it are the godlike powers of the angelic orders. From it they have their unchangeable being and all their intellectual and immortal perpetual activities, and their own stability and unfailing aspiration of the good they have received from that infinitely good power which itself imparts to them their power and their being, and their perpetual aspiration to being, and the power to aspire to that ceaseless power. From this ever-flowing power, men and animals and plants and the entire nature of the universe are filled. It disposes unified natures to mutual harmony and communion, and gives to each individual thing the power to be according to its own particular reason and form, distinct from and unmingled with others. And it guides according to their appropriate good the laws of the universe and the activities related to them, and guards the immortal lives of the individual angels inviolate, and keeps the heavenly and luminous and starry substances unchanged in their own orders, and gives eternity the power to be, and differentiates the cycles of time in their beginnings, and joins them together in their returning. And it makes the powers of fire unquenchable, and the flow of water unfailing. It sets a bound to the fluid air, and establishes the earth upon the void, and maintains its imperishable and life-bearing travail. It preserves the mutual harmony of the mingling elements unconfused and yet inseparable, and makes fast the bond uniting soul and body. It quickens the powers of growth and nourishment in plants, and supports the essential powers of the whole, and protects the stability of the universe from dissolution, and bestows even deification itself by giving the capacity for this to those who are being deified. And in a word, there is no single thing in the entire universe which is outside the almighty embrace and safekeeping of the divine power. For that which is absolutely without power has no existence or qualities, and no place whatever in the universe. The name winds given to the angels denotes their swift operations and their almost immediate impenetration of everything, and a transmitting power in all realms, reaching from the above to the below, and from the depths to the heights, and the power which uplifts the second natures to the height above them, and moves the first to participative and providential upliftment of the lower. But perhaps it may be said that the name winds applied to the aerial spirit signifies the divine likeness in the celestial beings, for the figure is a true image and type of divine energy corresponding to the moving and generative forces of nature, and a swift and irresistible advance, and the mystery, unknown and unseen by us, of the motive principles and ends. For he says, "Thou knowest not whence it cometh, nor whither it goeth." The scriptures also depict them as a cloud, showing by this that these holy intelligences are filled in a supermundane manner with the hidden light, receiving that first revelation without undue glorying, and transmitting it with abundant brightness to the lower orders as a secondary, proportionate illumination. And further, that they possess generating, life-giving, increasing, and perfecting powers by reason of their intelligible outpourings, as of showers quickening the receptive womb of earth by fertilizing rains for life-giving travail. Let us pass on to the sacred unfoldment of the symbolism which depicts the celestial intelligences in the likeness of beasts. The form of a lion must be regarded as typifying their power of sovereignty, strength, and indomitableness, and the ardent striving upward with all their powers to that most hidden, ineffable, mysterious divine unity. The figure of the ox signifies strength and vigor and the opening of the intellectual furrows to the reception of fertilizing showers, and the horns signify the guarding and unconquerable power. The form of the eagle signifies royalty and high soaring and swiftness of flight, and the eager seizing of that food which renews their strength, discretion, and ease of movement and skill, with strong intensity of vision, which has the power to gaze unhindered, directly and unflinchingly upon the full and brilliant splendor of the brightness of the divine sun. The symbolism of horses represents obedience and tractability. The shining white horses denote clear truth and that which is perfectly assimilated to the divine light. The dark, that which is hidden and secret. The red, fiery might and energy. The dappled black and white, that power which traverses all and connects the extremes providentially and with perfecting power, uniting the highest to the lowest and the lowest to the highest. If we had not to bear in mind the length of our discourse, we might well describe the symbolic relations of the particular characteristics of animals already given and all their bodily forms with the powers of the celestial intelligences according to dissimilar similitudes. For example, their fury of anger represents an intellectual power of resistance, of which anger is the last and faintest echo. Their desire symbolizes the divine love, and in short, we might find in all the irrational tendencies and many parts of irrational creatures figures of the immaterial conceptions and single powers of the celestial beings. Matthew. In this passage, we have a redemption of the word power. The angelic orders receive their godlike powers, including their aspirations to goodness, from an infinitely good power. Dionysius celebrates their power to aspire to that ceaseless power. But this power is not limited to the angels. It's the same power that flows into men, animals, plants, and the entire nature of the universe. All things are filled with this ever-flowing power. It's interesting that all beings, including angels, participate in this same energy or power. From this point of view, we are not different from the angels. Dionysius offers the image of a power as a maternal, embracing, one that extends great security. There is no single thing in the entire universe which is outside the almighty embrace and safekeeping of the divine power. The universe is filled with power. Every wind is a power from all directions. All beings share in the angelic powers, and angels penetrate everything. I like the phrase, reaching from the above to the below, and from the depths to the heights. And the angels possess generating, life-giving powers. He sees powers everywhere in nature in which angels play, including characteristics of the animals such as fury and anger. That's interesting because elsewhere he insists on the intellectualization of these immaterial spirits. Here he seems to be attributing anger, resistance, and desire, in other words, passions, to the angels. It seems that nature and angels come together for him at the level of power. Maybe we have other names for that, like energy or force. But he has a very cosmic sense of the omnipresence of the divine power expressing itself through angels and all other creatures. The divine power is playing in all these fields. It's all one power, but it's playing in different forms, including the angelic species. Rupert. Yes, He seems to imply that each kind of organization in nature, including light and fire, wind, and the life of animals, is perfused with consciousness, not an undifferentiated or transcendent divine consciousness, but a differentiated consciousness appropriate to each kind of organization. Nature is organized by fields, and these fields are the realms of activity that bind and order the energy or power. If divine power flows through and into all things, if it is the energy of all things, and if it is channeled through the angels, then the fields that give this power its differentiated forms are associated with consciousness and intelligence. The angels are, as it were, the consciousness of the fields operating at all levels of nature, as in the flow of the winds and in the powers of living beings such as animals. The generative powers of nature are associated with intelligence. Dionysius gives us a view of living nature pervaded by differentiated intelligence, by consciousness participating in the divine being. Matthew, would you say this is animism? Rupert, more than animism. Animism says that nature is alive and that all living beings are pervaded by souls. But souls needn't necessarily be conscious. The soul of a plant, and even the vegetative psyche that organizes the growth of a human embryo, is not necessarily conscious. Most soul or psychic activities are unconscious or habitual. Even in our own case, the great majority of our psyche is unconscious. What he is saying goes beyond animism. He is not simply saying that all nature is alive and that there are animating souls in all nature. If we think in terms of fields instead of souls, his doctrines imply not only that all things have power or energy organized by fields, but that they participate in consciousness and intelligence through the angels, and indeed, through the angels participate in the divine nature. Their energy and power are also participations in the divine nature, mediated through the angelic hierarchies, not as a blind communication of force, but always guided by intelligence. I think this view is particularly relevant in the modern context, even more so than at the time of Dionysius, when nature was considered to be fixed. The species of animals didn't change. There was no evolution in nature. We now see everything in an evolutionary context. The intelligence associated with all levels of organization could be seen as playing a creative or guiding role in the evolutionary process. Matthew, I'd say it takes more intelligence to carry on creation as a process than just to make it happen all at once. Rupert, so these doctrines of angelic intelligences take on an extraordinary new relevance in the light of evolutionary cosmology. Matthew, and this recalls what Eric Shantz said: God is the mind of the universe, which evolves and creates self-organizing systems or fields. It underscores the immanence of the divine mind and purpose and love, therefore, within the many, many fields in which we live, move, and have our being. Meet me at the next video where we continue with the reading of The Physics of Angels, exploring the realm where science and spirit meet. The authors will continue on this conversation and share about angels and the heavens, angelic intuition, divine light, and on working with angels. Please do hit the like button if you know of friends and family that are interested in this topic. Please share the video, and yes, subscribe to my channel.